Today we are talking about Smite's next god again. We've already talked about him in the past, but we have new, very exciting information, as you can probably already see from the title. And that next god, if you don't know it yet, is Olorun. He's the first god from the Yoruba pantheon, the African pantheon, so to speak. And we already knew a little bit about his lore from last time, so we're not going to dive into that too deep. And instead, we're going to focus on the new abilities and mechanics of this god. We already also have some information on the next god afterwards, which we'll talk about after we are done with Olorun. But always keep in mind this is data mine stuff, so this is subject to change, or sometimes Hires just puts out little baits as well and misleads us. But I could imagine this one actually being quite possible. So, Olorun is the supreme god and leader of the Orisha under the pantheon of the Yoruba. And he's also depicted as the god of the sky. Yoruba is now classified as a pantheon in Smite as well, so that part is confirmed too. He had some mechanics beforehand that were kind of unclear, and those are still exist. So something in his kit interacts with a glowing effect, and he's tested with some raw assets and the Sunstar skin mesh, so possibly because he might be levitating, as he's depicted as levitating in quite a few of his designs, though his visuals are very different from source to source, basically. What we know about the basic attack now is that it is a projectile and that he has magical power. So that makes it very, very likely that he's going to be a mage, because magical power can really only be a mage or a guardian. But we also know that guardians typically don't have projectiles, with the exception of Sylvanas in one way. But we'll get into the rest of his kit and it becomes more clear why I'm very, very certain that he's going to be a mage. And the big part of that reason is the passive. So the passive has a stacking mechanic, and we'll actually get into what that is as well. It somehow interacts with the second ability, and in another way it also interacts with the first ability, which we'll see later. So it seems to be weaving into his kit quite heavily. But here comes the very interesting part. The passive has different properties. It's a passive that starts at the minimum of 100 magical power, which is another reason that makes me think this is probably going to be a mage, because most guardians are typically not focused on building power and just get that as a side benefit. And this passive has a starting crit chance of 10%. So essentially, it sounds like when you reach 100 magical power, then somewhere, somehow, you will get 10% crit chance. And this critical chance scales up, and these are probably the stacks. With per magical power, you get 0.1% crit chance. Meaning for 10 magical power, you get 1% crit chance, or even easier, for 100 magical power, you get 10% crit chance. This caps at 60% maximum crit chance, or in other words, at 600 magical power. Ferreo, the writer of Smite data mining, had some speculation as to what exactly this could mean. Option 1, Olorun is a mage with the ability of making basic attacks crit. Option 2, Olorun is a mage with the ability of making crits skill-based or basic attacks, so abilities could proc as well somehow. Option 3, Olorun is a mix of magical power and physical power, being the first hybrid god. And option 4, Olorun is a physical power-based assassin, but scales somehow with magical power, so you can build him as a magical character for crits or physical for damage. Now, I honestly don't believe that with the current mechanics it's very likely that Hires is going to introduce a hybrid character into the game. The mix of effects that you can get between physical and magical items would just make that a little bit too scary and a little bit too hard to balance compared to everything else, so I doubt it so far. And I also don't think that he would be an assassin either, because he's going to have a projectile basic attack. I also think that he is going to have magical power based on the fact that in his basic attack description it says magical power. So what I'm expecting is that he is going to be a mage that builds mage items, but somehow has a crit chance in his passive that either applies to the basic attack or to specific abilities. Which one of those it is, I can't say for sure. But so far I don't see much evidence pointing towards him actually having physical properties as well. Let's look into his abilities now. His first ability is a projectile with a targeting ruler, so it should be some sort of damaging line ability. And with this ability, the distance can grow, So apparently it's a line that lets you fire further. This could mean many things. It could, for example, be like Merlin, where in his arcane stance you have that growing projectile, or it could be something that's more similar to Set's one, where you can place something else on the line somewhere and then it will have a different effect, or it could be maybe even similar to Spirit Ball, and you can just have certain effects at a certain point of the line. But what's even more interesting about this is that the first skill is somehow connected to crit damage. So either the first skill itself can do crit damage, and it's an ability that can crit, think for example Naja 3 as well, or it enables you to do crits with basic attacks, and that could be very interesting. It could possibly be like a steroid kind of thing where the projectile just goes through everything once you activate it and can suddenly crit. That could be an option. Or similar to Horus 1, where you use an ability first and then afterwards your basic attack will have that extra effect of the crit. It's somehow activated, but it's not quite clear how you can activate that effect. Before we get to the rest of the abilities, just a quick reminder, if you enjoyed this video, please click the like button, it greatly helps me and the channel out. The second ability are some sort of orbs, and you can charge these orbs, and these orbs are projectiles. It's unclear how exactly you can charge them though. The orb itself has AoE burst damage, and it has an effect on the first hit. When you successfully hit, a bonus damage is applied if it's the first shot. So apparently this ability in some way has multiple shots, and I don't know at which point the bonus damage will apply, if it's immediately or if there's some proc effect to it. It also comes with a buff stim, so some sort of amplification here, and it has certain properties that describe the ability a little bit. One is sun height 15, so it seems like this has something to do with the sun in one way or another, and also max ammo 1, so this means that this has a limited amount of projectiles, and this will probably be multiple considering that you have bonus damage on the first one, meaning there should be more than one. But there's even more to the ability. The orb spawns a mesh, or the orb itself is a projectile that acts as a mesh. The stack count modifies the bonus damage or something like that. And there are two formulas for this. Base damage is bonus damage times bonus damage percent, and scaling factor is bonus scaling times bonus damage percent. Interesting speculation someone had on Reddit regarding this is that maybe it works similar to Zenyatta from Overwatch, who has an orb that he can place on an enemy in order to make them take more damage. The fact that you can use multiple orbs, however, means that it still works a little bit differently, and it seems like the initial orb will also deal some amount of damage itself. Therefore, it's not just a pure amplifier, but has different components to it. I could imagine that this is something you want to use before you use your one, before you crit and deal more damage that way. And that brings us to the new information about this third ability. The third ability is an AoE, area damage ability. It has a buff, and it also has a self buff. Along with that, it comes with a deployable, and it can apparently heal allies. It can also slow, and it has some sort of protection stack effect. Now, I'm not quite sure what kind of niche Olorun is supposed to fill, because I can't really imagine him as a pure healer type when he has crit in his kit. It would just be a little bit weird. I think he has some supportive properties, at least through this orb from his second ability, but the fact that he has crit himself, to me, feels like he also has an aggressive component to most of his abilities, so I'm not quite sure how the 3 fits in there. We, for example, have the situation with Ra where he can heal as well, but he also deals damage to enemies when they go into it. So I could imagine that the heal is the part that applies to allies, whereas the slow of the deployable, which you place on the ground possibly even, is something that applies to enemies, and the protection stack may be protection reduction, or it may be stacks for your allies. But either way, it's something that probably affects both allies and enemies somehow. And then last but not least, we of course have the ultimate as well. The ultimate is also a deployable, and it also comes with a buff, so this might be copied from the third ability, and they might actually not be both working this way in the end. It also has a debuff, and it has a deployable intro, so it sounds like this is some bigger effect that's gonna go on, and some post-processing effects that are already listed as well. The ultimate has a lot of vector calculations, inwards, backwards, front and sides, So it's probably shooting projectiles in a lot of different directions, and it also seems to spawn deployables. And a little bit of speculation here is that maybe these are shooting stars, as we have seen from the trailer, the brief intro for Olorun that Hi-Rez posted at the beginning of the year. So I could imagine it's just shooting stars crashing from the sky, landing on the ground, which also fits with the whole lore thing. And I don't know if they're going to deal damage or if they're actually going to be healing allies, maybe helping allies in some way, or maybe both, but they will definitely have an impact one way or another. And I'm not 100% sure this is how it's going to work, but I have a feeling that they are implemented in the kit at least somehow, and this would be a very fitting place if it's not the orbs of the two. And that's all we have for Olorun, but we also have some information on the god after that. And we knew about this god that he was supposed to come from the underworld somehow, but we didn't actually know if it was a he or a she. And from what we know now, it's probably going to be a she. We also had a hint on the patch notes show where there was a new skin that was shown for Hades with an empty chair next to him, and the team was kind of talking about how that chair isn't filled yet, and then they were asking if they could even spoil that or whatever. And, well, if you know a little bit of lore, then you could kind of figure out from that already, but now we also have confirmation in another way, because the Reddit user Marlon Ball figured out that Persephone is mentioned in the in-game files in the new unicorn skin for Set as a direct taunt. So you always have the voice lines, and then you always have the part where it says taunt directed and then the god name afterwards, and there's one that's called taunt directed Persephone. So Persephone, queen of the underworld and wife of Hades, as well as the goddess or personification of vegetation, is going to be the next goddess. Some people have already mentioned that she might be designed similar to Zyra from League of Legends, and if that's the case, I'm super happy, because that's one of the few mages in that game that I used to play a lot, and I really love the design. And if we get anything close to that with a lot of roots and plants going on, I'm completely down for it. But we'll see, because the visuals that Hi-Rez showed so far didn't really indicate much yet. And that's it for this video. You can check out SMITE data mining down below. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and move the bell, it really helps me out. And I've also hidden a code somewhere in this video, which you can just grab like that. It's for a fantastic skin, Baron Sam the Illuminator. See you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.